"Do you know what cruel people fear most, Miss Bennet?" the old housekeeper had once asked Clara. "Not tears, not anger. They fear a woman who refuses to bow." Those words returned to her at the precise moment the silk tore. The sound was small, almost delicate, no louder than paper ripped beside a candle. Yet in the grand ballroom of Blackthorn Hall, it seemed to silence 200 conversations at once. Clara Bennet stopped beneath the crystal chandeliers, one gloved hand still resting against the carved doorway, while a cold draft slipped across the exposed seam at the back of her pale blue gown. Someone gasped. Someone else laughed. Then the whispers began, swift and poisonous. "Good heavens! Look at her dress. How embarrassing." Clara did not turn toward Lady Vanessa Caldwell, though she had felt Vanessa's fingers brush the ribbon at her waist only seconds earlier. She did not need to see the satisfied curve of the woman's smile to understand what had happened. The gown had been altered deliberately. One sharp pull, one weakened seam, and the modest dress Clara had spent 3 evenings repairing had become a spectacle. Across the ballroom, women glittered in satin and jewels while gentlemen stood beneath portraits of dead dukes, all of them suddenly united by the same fascination. Humiliation was always more entertaining when it belonged to someone else. Clara's fingers trembled once. Only once. She reached for the small silver pin hidden at her sleeve, the last belonging of her mother, and fastened the torn fabric near her shoulder. The metal caught her skin, but she did not flinch. "Poor thing," a woman murmured nearby. "Surely His Grace will not even look at her now." That was the purpose, Clara realized. Tonight was not merely another winter ball. Everyone in the county knew why Duke Alexander Whitmore had returned to society. Before spring, he was expected to choose a wife, and nearly every ambitious family within 50 miles had brought a daughter to Blackthorn Hall. Clara was not among them. She had come only because her aunt insisted that Margaret Bennet required a companion. Clara had no fortune, no title, and no illusion that a duke would notice her. Vanessa, however, had noticed something far more dangerous. Alexander had spoken to Clara twice that week, once in the library, once beside the conservatory windows. Apparently, that had been enough. Clara lifted her chin. She could leave. Every instinct urged her toward the corridor, toward darkness, toward anywhere beyond the staring eyes. But if she ran, this moment would belong to them forever. So she stepped forward. One step, then another. The orchestra had stopped playing. Clara crossed nearly 30 feet of polished floor beneath a silence heavier than judgment. At the top of the marble staircase stood Alexander Whitmore, Duke of Blackthorn, dressed in black evening clothes, one hand resting lightly against the banister. His face revealed nothing. His gray eyes moved from the torn silk to Vanessa, then back to Clara. He began descending the stairs. The room seemed to breathe with him. Vanessa straightened, certain he was coming toward her. Alexander passed her without a word. He stopped before Clara. For one terrible second, she expected pity. Instead, his voice was quiet enough that everyone leaned closer to hear. "Who did that?" Clara met his gaze. "It doesn't matter, Your Grace." Something changed in his expression, subtle as a shadow crossing stone. "It matters to me." No one laughed now. Clara could hear only the faint crackle of candles and the pounding of her own heart. Alexander removed one glove, extended his hand, and said, "Miss Bennet, dance with me." For one suspended moment, Clara thought she had misunderstood him. The Duke of Blackthorn stood before her with his bare hand extended while every person in the ballroom watched, and there was nothing uncertain in his expression. She placed her gloved fingers in his. The orchestra, startled back into duty by a glance from Alexander, began a slow waltz. He led her toward the center of the floor as though nothing unusual had happened, as though a torn gown and 200 curious eyes were no more significant than dust upon a window. Clara kept her shoulders straight. "You do not need to rescue me, Your Grace," she said quietly. His gaze settled on her face. "I was not aware that I was." Around them, couples hesitated before joining the dance. Alexander turned her with measured precision, keeping a respectful distance between them. "I asked you to dance, Miss Bennet. Those are different things." Clara almost smiled, but the room was too watchful for softness. Everyone believes otherwise. Everyone in this room believes many things because it saves them the trouble of thinking. His answer was so dry that Clara looked at him properly for the first time. Alexander Whitmore was not smiling, yet something faintly human had entered his eyes. Beyond his shoulder, Vanessa stood beside the marble staircase, perfectly composed except for the white grip of her fingers around her fan. Clara understood then that this dance had wounded no one physically, yet it had shattered an expectation carefully built over months. Vanessa had entered Blackthorn Hall believing the evening would confirm her place beside the Duke. Instead, Alexander had crossed the room for someone wearing a damaged dress. "You are making enemies for me," Clara murmured. "I suspect you already had them. Then you are making them more determined." His eyes moved briefly toward Vanessa. "Good. Determined people make mistakes." Clara missed half a step. Alexander steadied the rhythm without tightening his hold. "You knew?" she asked. "I know that your dress did not tear by accident. That is not proof." "No," his voice lowered. "But cruelty is rarely as clever as it believes itself to be." The waltz carried them beneath the chandeliers, where hundreds of candles reflected in the polished floor like fallen stars. Clara felt the silver pin at her shoulder shift. She reached instinctively to secure it, and Alexander's gaze followed the movement. The engraved initials caught the light. T.B. His composure changed so slightly that no one else would have noticed. Clara did. His step slowed. "That pin," he said. "Where did you get it?" She glanced at the small piece of silver, suddenly conscious of how old and plain it looked among the jewels surrounding them. "It belonged to my father." Alexander's eyes returned to hers. "Your father was Thomas Bennet?" The question chilled her more than the winter wind beyond the windows. "Yes." For the first time that evening, the Duke looked genuinely shaken. The music continued, but something between them had gone still. "You knew him?" Clara asked. Alexander did not answer immediately. His gaze drifted toward the dark portrait of his late father hanging above the far fireplace, and when he looked back, the warmth that had briefly entered his expression was gone. "I knew his name," he said. Clara felt an old instinct awaken inside her, the instinct that had taught her never to trust silence where her father was concerned. "That is not the same thing." "No," Alexander replied. "It is not." The waltz ended. Applause rose around them, polite and uncertain. Alexander bowed. But before releasing her hand, he said in a voice meant only for her, "Miss Bennet, there are things about your father that I need to understand." Clara held his gaze. "Then perhaps, Your Grace, you should begin by telling me why hearing his name made you afraid." Clara did not wait for an answer beneath the chandeliers. The applause around them was still fading when she withdrew her hand and stepped away with as much composure as she could gather. Alexander let her go. That unsettled her more than if he had followed. By midnight, the winter ball had dissolved into smaller circles of conversation, card tables, and whispered speculation, but Clara felt the Duke's unanswered silence following her through every room. She found refuge at last in the West Library, where the fire had burned low and the tall windows reflected nothing but darkness. Shelves of leather-bound volumes rose around her like walls built for secrets. She had always trusted rooms full of books more than rooms full of people. "You should not be alone in here." Alexander's voice came from the doorway. Clara turned. He had removed his formal coat and now wore a dark waistcoat, the severity of his evening attire softened by the absence of ceremony. "Neither should you, Your Grace. It is my library." "Then I suppose I am the intruder." "I did not say that." He entered and closed the door only far enough to quiet the noise from the distant ballroom, leaving it visibly open. The gesture did not escape her. Neither did the careful distance he kept between them. Clara folded her hands before her. "You knew my father's name." Alexander looked toward the fire. "My father knew him." "That is not what I asked." His jaw tightened. Thomas Bennet managed 3 of the southern farms attached to Blackthorn lands. He was considered capable, precise, trusted. Clara's expression did not change, but her voice did. "Until he was called a thief." Alexander looked at her then. "Yes." The word landed between them like winter. Clara reached beneath the ribbon at her waist and drew out a small silver pocket watch attached to a worn chain. He carried this every day until the accusations began. After that, he stopped wearing it. He said a man should not measure time when every hour is spent waiting for people to believe the worst of him. Alexander's eyes fixed on the watch. The crest engraved on its lid was not the Bennet crest. It was Blackthorn's. "Where did he get that?" he asked. "Your grandfather gave it to him after 20 years of service." Clara closed her fingers around it. "My father kept it even after your family dismissed him. I never understood why." Alexander crossed to an old writing desk and opened a drawer. From beneath a stack of correspondence, he withdrew a narrow ledger bound in cracked brown leather. He placed it on the desk, but did not open it. My father kept records of everything. Clara stared at the ledger. Including the accusation? Including payments, transfers, land accounts, and disciplinary decisions. Then you know what happened. I know what I was told. Clara's gaze sharpened. And you believed it. I was 16. That is not an answer. No, his voice dropped. It is an excuse. The honesty stopped her. For a moment neither spoke. Firelight moved across the room, catching dust in the air. Alexander rested one hand on the ledger. My father said Thomas Bennett falsified accounts and diverted estate funds over nearly 2 years. He said there was proof. Clara's face went pale, but she did not look away. There was never proof shown to us. Alexander opened the ledger. Several pages had been removed cleanly from the center. His expression hardened. There should have been. Clara stepped closer despite herself. What is missing? The months surrounding the accusation. She looked at him. Convenient. Too convenient. Alexander turned another page. A name appeared in the margin beside a series of transfers. Caldwell. Clara saw it at the same moment he did. Vanessa's family. The room seemed suddenly colder. You see it, Clara whispered. Alexander said nothing. You know what that means. I know what it might mean. There is a difference between caution and cowardice, Your Grace. His eyes lifted to hers. I am beginning to understand that. Clara closed the watch in her palm. My father died believing no one would ever clear his name. Alexander looked again at the missing pages, then at the blackthorn crest on the watch she held. Then perhaps someone removed more than money from these accounts. Clara's breath caught. He closed the ledger carefully. And perhaps, he said, your father was never the man my family claimed he was. By morning, Blackthorn Hall had hidden the previous night beneath fresh snow, as though winter itself had decided that scandal could be covered by something clean. Clara stood near the tall windows of the breakfast room, watching servants clear a narrow path through nearly 6 inches of white, when a steward entered carrying a folded note. From His Grace, Miss Bennett. Clara opened it expecting questions about her father. Instead, there were only 7 words. Meet me at the South Tenant office. An hour later, wrapped in her plain wool cloak, she crossed the frozen courtyard toward a low stone building nearly half a mile from the main house. Alexander was already there, standing beside a table crowded with ledgers, rent notices, and maps. You summoned me like an accountant, Clara said. I was hoping you would take that as a compliment. I have known too many accountants to be certain. The faintest change touched his mouth. Almost a smile. Then he turned serious. 3 families on the southern farms are scheduled for removal before the end of the month. Their accounts show repeated arrears. Clara looked down at the papers. And you believe the numbers? I believe numbers are usually less dishonest than people. Only when honest people write them. His gaze shifted to her. That sounds familiar. She ignored the remark and began reading. Within minutes, the cold room disappeared around her. Her father had taught her estate arithmetic before she was old enough to understand why a girl was not supposed to know such things. Seed costs, winter feed, labor days, rent cycles, yield estimates. Clara traced one column with her finger. This is wrong. Alexander moved closer, though still keeping a respectful space between them. Where? Here. The Barrow farm was charged twice for repairs to the eastern drainage ditch. That would not account for the full deficit. No. But this might. She turned 3 pages. The harvest loss was calculated against the summer estimate, not the final yield. They are being charged rent as though the crop had succeeded. Alexander read the figures again. His expression hardened. That would put nearly $80 back against each family account. More, once the duplicate charges are removed. He stared at her. You saw that in less than 10 minutes. Clara continued reading. My father used to say that numbers confess when you ask the right question. For a long moment, Alexander said nothing. Then he pulled a chair beside the table. Sit. That sounded suspiciously like an order. A request badly dressed. This time she did smile. They worked until noon. The room warmed slowly from the small iron stove, and with each corrected entry Alexander became quieter, not colder, but thoughtful. Clara noticed he listened completely when she spoke. No polite interruption. No indulgent nod. When she challenged him, he checked the figures. When she was right, He said so. That alone felt strangely rare. At one point, both reached for the same page. Their fingers touched lightly over the paper. Clara withdrew first. Alexander did not pretend it had not happened. His eyes met hers, steady and unreadable, and for one brief second the silence felt more intimate than conversation. Then he looked back at the ledger. You should have been running an estate. Women like me are usually asked to run households and call it ambition. Then the world has been wasting capable people. Clara studied him. That is a dangerous opinion for a duke. I have recently discovered that several comfortable opinions in this house may deserve to be dangerous. Before she could answer, the steward entered with another packet. Alexander opened it and frowned. From the Caldwell estate. Clara felt the room change. Inside was a formal invitation to dinner the following evening, signed by Lady Vanessa's father. Beneath it lay a second paper, older, yellowed at the edges. Alexander unfolded it slowly. Clara recognized her father's name before he spoke. Thomas Bennet, he said, and beside it, a transfer authorization signed by Lord Caldwell. The fire snapped softly behind them. Clara looked from the document to Alexander. So now you have another question. He folded the paper once. No, his voice was calm, but something decisive had entered it. Now I have a reason to start asking the right ones. Lady Vanessa Caldwell arrived at Blackthorn Hall the following evening wearing ivory silk, so flawless it seemed designed to mock every imperfect thing in the room. Clara noticed the dress before she noticed the woman, not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because perfection had become suspicious to her. Vanessa entered beside her father with the serene confidence of someone who had never been made to doubt her place in the world. Lord Caldwell greeted Alexander warmly, speaking of weather, hunting, and neighboring estates, while Clara stood near the far end of the drawing room with her aunt and Margaret. No one mentioned the old transfer authorization. No one needed to. Alexander had placed the document inside his private desk before dinner, but its existence followed him like a second shadow. Clara watched him receive the Caldwells with impeccable courtesy. That, more than anger, unsettled her. He was learning to hide what he knew. Vanessa approached Clara before the dinner bell. Miss Bennet, she said softly, her smile polished enough for witnesses. I hope you recovered from your unfortunate accident. Clara met her eyes. I recovered before the music ended. Vanessa's smile tightened. How fortunate. Very. For a moment they stood beneath the candlelight, two women speaking politely while understanding every word beneath the words. Vanessa glanced toward Alexander. His Grace has always had a generous instinct toward those in difficulty. Then I hope he never finds you in need of it. Clara's reply remained gentle. Vanessa's expression cooled. You misunderstand your position. No, Clara said. I think I understand it better than I did 2 nights ago. The dinner bell saved them from further civility. At table, Vanessa sat at Alexander's right, exactly where society expected her to be. Clara was placed farther down, beside an elderly baronet who spoke for nearly 15 minutes about drainage canals. Under ordinary circumstances, she might have been grateful for the subject. Tonight, her attention kept returning to the head of the table. Lord Caldwell spoke frequently of the southern estates, praising the careful management of his family holdings. Alexander listened. You have kept remarkably complete records, he observed. My father believed records were the backbone of any respectable house, Vanessa said. Then he and mine agreed on something, Alexander replied. The words were mild, but Clara saw Lord Caldwell pause before lifting his wineglass. It lasted less than a second. Alexander saw it too. Later, in the drawing room, Vanessa stood before the fireplace speaking with Margaret while Alexander crossed to Clara carrying a small stack of correspondence. Walk with me, he said. They moved into the adjoining gallery, where ancestral portraits disappeared into shadow between pools of lamplight. You were right about the tenant accounts, he said. The removals have been canceled. Clara looked at him. All 3 families. All 3. And the charges? Corrected. She released a breath she had not known she was holding. Good. Alexander watched her carefully. You care more about that than about what happens to your own reputation. Their children need roofs. My reputation has survived worse than whispers. That answer is precisely why I asked you. Asked me what? He handed her the correspondence. These are copies of estate reports from 10 years ago. Several payments were routed through companies connected to Caldwell Holdings. Clara looked down at the pages. You found this today? My solicitor did. Then why invite them here? Alexander's voice dropped. Because guilty people often reveal more when they believe they are safe. Clara looked back toward the drawing room, where Vanessa's laughter floated faintly through the open doors. And if they realize you are investigating, then they will become careless. Clara thought of Vanessa's perfect dress, perfect posture, perfect smile. She is already afraid. Alexander's gaze sharpened. Why? Because she spoke to me as if I had taken something from her. Have you? Clara turned to him. Have I? For the first time, Alexander had no immediate answer. The silence between them changed, warmer than the lamps, more dangerous than accusation. Then a servant appeared at the end of the gallery carrying a sealed envelope. Your Grace. This was delivered for Lady Caldwell. Vanessa entered behind him before Alexander could respond. She took the envelope quickly, but not before Clara saw the handwriting on the front. It matched the old transfer authorization. Vanessa's face lost its color for one brief instant. Then she smiled. Merely family business. Alexander inclined his head. Of course. Vanessa walked away with perfect composure. Only after she disappeared did Clara whisper, she knows. Alexander looked toward the darkened doorway. Yes. But upstairs, behind a locked bedroom door, Vanessa broke the seal with shaking fingers and read the message twice. The missing Blackthorn ledger pages had been found. The next evening, Blackthorn Hall glittered with the false warmth of a house pretending nothing had changed. More guests had arrived before dinner, including neighboring landowners, titled families, and several people Clara recognized as those who had laughed when her dress had torn. Vanessa moved among them with effortless grace, but Clara noticed something different now. She was no longer merely proud. She was desperate. Alexander noticed it too. He had spent the day waiting for his solicitor to confirm whether the recovered ledger pages were genuine, but the messenger had been delayed by snow on the northern road. Until those pages arrived, suspicion was all he possessed. Vanessa understood that weakness. Dinner had barely reached its second course when Lord Caldwell placed his glass beside his plate and said, There is an unfortunate matter I believe His Grace should know before certain associations become difficult to explain. The room quieted. Clara felt Alexander's gaze sharpen. If this concerns estate business, he said, we can discuss it privately. I fear it concerns reputation. Vanessa lowered her eyes with practiced reluctance. Father, perhaps this is not the time. That performance told Clara everything. Lord Caldwell produced an old document. Thomas Bennet, formerly employed by the Whitmore family, was dismissed after funds disappeared from Blackthorn accounts. His own signature appears on several questionable entries. Clara's fingers went cold beneath the table. Whispers began immediately. Thomas Bennet? Someone murmured. Was that not the man accused of theft? Another voice answered. Yes. I remember the scandal. Clara looked at Alexander. He had risen slightly from his chair, his expression controlled. Those accounts are under investigation, he said. Lord Caldwell smiled. Investigation does not erase history, nor does repetition make an accusation true. The words were firm, yet Clara heard what was missing. He did not say her father was innocent. Vanessa heard it too. She turned gently toward Clara. I am sorry. Truly. None of us choose the mistakes of our parents. Clara stood. The movement silenced the table. My father made many mistakes, she said, her voice steady despite the pressure behind her ribs. Trusting the wrong people may have been the greatest. Lord Caldwell's face tightened. Clara looked again at Alexander. For 1 second, she waited. She hated herself for waiting. She wanted him to say what he had said in the library, that perhaps Thomas Bennet had never been the man his family claimed. She wanted him to stand before these people with the same certainty he had shown when he crossed the ballroom toward her. But Alexander remained silent. Not from doubt, from caution. He knew the recovered pages might clear Thomas, but until he held them, he would not make a claim he could not prove. Clara could not know that. All she saw was silence. The same silence that had followed her father through the final years of his life. She reached to her shoulder and removed the small silver pin that had once held her torn dress together. Alexander recognized it immediately. She placed it beside his plate. The first time they humiliated me, she said softly. You gave me your hand. His face changed. Clara, tonight, I needed your belief. She did not cry. That would have made the room too comfortable. Instead, she lifted her chin, turned from the table, and walked toward the doors. Alexander followed her into the entrance hall. Snow pressed white against the windows. You think I doubt him, he said. Clara fastened her cloak. I think you are waiting for permission to believe him. I am waiting for proof. My father waited for proof too. Her voice nearly broke, but she held it steady. He died before anyone cared enough to find it. Alexander stopped. Clara opened the door. Cold air swept through the hall. Where will you go? Somewhere. My name is not a question being debated over dinner. She stepped outside. Behind her, Alexander stood beneath the candlelight with the silver pin in his hand, and for the first time he understood that silence could wound without raising its voice. Alexander did not return to the dining room after Clara left. He stood alone in the entrance hall until the sound of the carriage faded beyond the snow-covered drive, the silver pin resting in his palm like an accusation he could not dismiss. For years he had believed restraint was a virtue. A duke did not speak before facts were certain. A Whitmore did not make promises without proof. Yet as the candlelight trembled across the black and white marble floor, Alexander understood how easily caution could resemble abandonment to someone who had already spent a lifetime waiting to be believed. He closed his fingers around the pen and went directly to his father's private archive. The room had remained locked since the old duke's death, more shrine than office, its shelves crowded with sealed boxes, correspondence, estate maps, and ledgers no one had touched in years. Alexander ordered a fire lit and dismissed the servants. Then he began searching. Midnight passed. Snow pressed against the windows. One box led to another, one name to another, until the past seemed less like history and more like a house built to hide its own foundations. Near 2 a.m, he found a bundle of letters tied with faded green ribbon. One bore Thomas Bennet's name. Alexander broke the brittle seal and read. Thomas had written repeatedly to the old duke, insisting that funds were being diverted through companies linked to Caldwell Holdings. He had warned that several signatures had been copied from prior documents. He had asked for an independent review. None had been granted. Alexander read the letter twice. Then a third time. Beneath it lay his father's response, never sent. The matter is inconvenient and must remain contained until the winter contracts are complete. Alexander stared at the sentence until the words blurred. His father had known there were questions. He had chosen silence, just as Alexander had done at dinner. A knock sounded at the archive door shortly before dawn. His solicitor entered carrying a weather-stained leather case. The missing pages, Your Grace. Alexander opened the case. The recovered ledger sheets matched the binding, ink, numbering, and account sequence of the Blackthorn records. The entries were clear. Money had been transferred through a Caldwell-controlled company, then disguised under Thomas Bennet's management codes. Thomas had not taken the funds. He had discovered the scheme. Alexander felt no triumph, only shame. There is more, the solicitor said. A former maid from the Caldwell household came forward after hearing there was an inquiry. Alexander looked up. About the accounts? About Miss Bennet. The woman had worked during the winter ball preparations. Vanessa had paid 2 servants to weaken the stitching of Clara's gown and catch the back ribbon as she entered the ballroom. It was meant to embarrass her. Nothing more, nothing less. Alexander lowered his gaze to the silver pin beside the ledger. Where is Miss Bennet now? At her aunt's cottage in Westmere, about 12 miles from here. Alexander rose. Prepare the carriage. By sunrise, he was traveling through pale winter fields beneath a sky the color of ash. He could have sent a letter. He could have sent the proof. But Clara had not needed paper at that dinner table. She had needed someone to stand beside her. When he reached the cottage, he found her in the small front garden brushing snow from a stone path. She looked surprised to see him, then guarded. You found your proof, she said. Alexander stepped from the carriage holding the ledger pages and Thomas's letters. Yes. Clara stared at them, but did not move closer. Then my father was innocent. He was. Her eyes closed for one brief second. No tears fell. Somehow that made the moment heavier. Alexander continued. He warned my father. My father ignored him, and I nearly repeated the same failure. Clara looked at him. Nearly. I let you leave believing my silence meant doubt. His voice lowered. It did not. But intention does not erase consequence. He held out the letters. These belong to you. Clara took them with both hands. Alexander then placed the silver pin on top. And this. She looked down at it. What happens now? The truth becomes public. Because you want to repair your family name? No, his eyes held hers. Because yours was damaged in public. Clara's expression shifted. Alexander looked back toward Blackthorn in the distance, hidden beyond miles of winter road. They judged your father in rooms full of witnesses. They judged you the same way. He turned to her again. Then they will hear the truth in one too. 3 nights later, the ballroom at Blackthorn Hall was bright again, but this time no one had been invited to dance. Alexander had summoned the same families who had attended the winter gathering, along with neighboring landowners, several estate officials, and the solicitor who had authenticated the missing records. Clara arrived quietly with her aunt and took a place near the back of the room. She wore a simple dark blue gown, carefully mended at the shoulder where the silk had once been damaged. She had refused Alexander's offer to replace it. "I do not want them to see a new dress," she had told him. "I want them to see that I remained." Now chandeliers burned above the polished floor, while conversations moved in uneasy whispers. Vanessa entered beside Lord Caldwell wearing silver and pearls, her expression composed until she saw Clara. Then the color left her face. Alexander stood near the fireplace with several documents arranged on a narrow table. He did not raise his voice when the room became silent. "Thank you for coming," he said. "There are 2 matters that require correction, and both have been allowed to remain in public long enough." Lord Caldwell stepped forward. "Alexander, surely private business does not require an audience. It ceased being private when Thomas Bennet's name was discussed before this same society." Clara felt every face turn toward her, but this time she did not lower her eyes. Alexander opened the recovered ledger. 10 years ago, estate funds disappeared under management codes assigned to Thomas Bennet. Those entries were used to accuse him of theft. He lifted another sheet. The original pages, recently recovered and independently examined, show that the money was transferred through a company controlled by Caldwell interests. A murmur passed through the room. Lord Caldwell's composure cracked. "That proves nothing. Business arrangements were complicated. Then perhaps Thomas Bennet's letters will simplify them." Alexander read only the essential lines, enough to show that Thomas had reported irregularities before he was accused. "He asked my father for an investigation. He was denied one." Clara's fingers closed around the silver pocket watch in her hand. Alexander looked directly at her. Thomas Bennet did not steal from Blackthorn. He attempted to protect it. The room went still. For years Clara had imagined what those words might sound like. She had expected relief. Instead she felt something quieter, deeper, almost like a door opening inside a house that had been locked too long. Vanessa suddenly spoke. "Even if that is true, it has nothing to do with Clara." Alexander turned toward her. "Unfortunately, Lady Vanessa, it does." A former Caldwell maid entered with the housekeeper. The young woman looked frightened, but Alexander addressed her gently. "You are not accused of anything here. I only ask you to repeat what you told my solicitor." She nodded. Lady Vanessa gave instructions before the winter ball. She said Miss Bennet's dress should be altered so the seam would open when the ribbon was pulled. A shocked whisper swept the room. Vanessa's face hardened. "She is lying." "I was there," the maid said softly. "I heard the order." Alexander looked across the ballroom, not only at Vanessa, but at everyone who had watched Clara's humiliation and mistaken cruelty for entertainment. "You laughed because her dress was torn." No one moved. His voice remained calm. "Tonight, I ask you to consider what was torn in you that made another person's shame amusing." Clara looked at the same faces that had once smiled behind fans and glasses. None could meet her eyes now. Lord Caldwell attempted to speak, but Alexander raised one hand. "This is not a trial conducted by rumor. The financial evidence has already been transferred to the proper authorities and estate council. What concerns this room is simpler." He turned to Clara. "A man's name was damaged here. So was his daughter's. Both deserve truth before judgment." Clara stepped forward, not because he called her, but because she chose to. She stopped beside the table and placed her father's pocket watch next to the recovered ledger. "My father kept this after Blackthorn dismissed him," she said. "I used to wonder why he held on to something from a family that had failed him." Alexander's eyes met hers. Clara touched the old silver case. Perhaps he was waiting for someone here to remember that loyalty should travel in both directions. The silence that followed was not the silence of humiliation. It was the silence of people forced to see themselves clearly. Vanessa stood alone beneath the chandeliers, surrounded by every advantage she had once believed made her untouchable, while Clara, wearing the same repaired gown they had tried to turn into a symbol of shame, stood straighter than anyone in the room. After the last guest had departed, Blackthorn Hall became quiet in a way Clara had never heard before. The chandeliers still burned above the empty ballroom, but without music, laughter, or whispers, the room seemed almost honest. Alexander stood near the long windows while snow drifted beyond the glass, softening the dark gardens beneath a pale winter sky. Clara remained beside the table where her father's pocket watch rested next to the recovered ledger. For several minutes neither spoke. There was no audience now. No one left to impress. No one left to silence. Alexander crossed the floor slowly and stopped several feet from her. "You should take the watch," he said. Clara touched the silver case with one finger. "I will." He nodded. Then his gaze fell to the repaired seam at her shoulder. "I owe you an apology that truth alone cannot settle." Clara looked at him. "You already gave my father his name back. That was justice, not apology." His voice was quiet. "At dinner, I believed caution made me honorable. I thought speaking without proof would make me reckless." Clara said nothing. Alexander continued. "But I forgot that sometimes silence protects the wrong person." The confession carried no drama, only weight. "You were right to leave." Clara studied his face, searching for the certainty she had once mistaken for coldness. "I did not leave because I wanted you to chase me. I know. And I did not return tonight because you asked. I know that too." Something gentler entered his expression. "That is why I am glad you came." Clara looked around the ballroom. "It feels different now. Because everyone is gone. Because I am no longer afraid of what this room remembers." Alexander glanced toward the place where they had first danced. "I remember something different." "What?" "A woman standing beneath 200 eyes, holding a torn dress together with a silver pin, refusing to disappear." Clara's breath caught, but she looked away before the feeling could betray her. "You chose to dance with me before you knew anything about my father." "Yes." "Why?" Alexander did not answer quickly. He had learned that some truths deserved more care than others. "Because everyone else saw embarrassment," he said at last. "I saw courage." Clara turned back to him. "And now?" He reached into his coat and withdrew a narrow strip of pale blue ribbon. Clara recognized it immediately. It was the piece torn from her gown on the night of the ball. "I found this on the ballroom floor after you left that evening," he said. "I kept it because I thought it marked the moment I made a choice." He held it out, but did not step closer. "I was wrong." Clara looked at the ribbon in his palm. "About what?" "That choice belonged to me." His eyes held hers. "That night, I chose you in front of everyone." He paused. "Tonight, I am asking you to choose for yourself." Clara's heart beat once, hard and clear. Alexander did not kneel. He did not offer a title, an estate, or a promise large enough to become another kind of pressure. He simply stood before her and waited. For the first time in years, Clara understood what freedom could feel like when it arrived quietly. She lifted the ribbon from his hand. "If I choose you," she said, "it will not be because you defended me. I would hope not. It will not be because you are a duke. Even better." A small smile touched her lips. "And it will not be because you believe you owe me anything." Alexander's voice softened. "Then I am running out of advantages." Clara looked at the torn ribbon, then placed it back into his hand. "Good." She extended her own. "Then begin again." Alexander took her hand with the same care he had shown on that first night. But this time there was no audience and no humiliation waiting behind them. Only choice. Only trust. Only two people who had finally learned that dignity was not restored when someone powerful decided your worth. It returned when you could stand before the world, remember everything it had tried to take from you, and still choose your own future.